Hello, what's up, everybody? It's your boy Eddie Huang. Chef from Bauhaus, author of Fresh Off the Boat. But something a lot of people don't know is that I am most proud to be Vanessa Potkin's student from the Innocence Project. And I was an Innocence Project clinic student from '06 to '07 while at Cardozo Law. And I'm just really excited to be here with all you guys today. And thank you for joining us on Facebook Live for the first conversation dedicated to the Innocence Project's Netflix series, The Innocence Files. This is a real exciting watershed moment for the whole Innocence Project family. So thanks to everybody that made it happen, and thanks for watching. Before we get started, I just wanted, and all of us wanted, to take a moment of silence for Ahmaud Arbery. So we will do that now. Thank you for that. We wanted to do that because I think that Innocence Project, while it is about exposing wrongful convictions, and the Innocence Files is about that as well. I at least in my understanding, and Vanessa can correct me if I'm wrong, and Dana as well, but I think the Innocence Project really is just about making sure that justice is served. The Innocence Files exposes the wrongful conviction of 8 people across the U.S. Over the next few weeks, the Innocence Project will be hosting conversations with several of the exonerees and experts in the show. We hope that you've had a chance to watch the first part of the series called The Evidence. These 3 episodes focus on the use of flawed forensics, like bite mark evidence, which sent Levon Brooks, Kennedy Brewer, and Keith Harward to prison for heinous crimes they did not commit. With us today, we're really lucky to have Keith Harward, who you should be familiar with from the series. Keith was a sailor stationed in Newport News, Virginia, when he was wrongfully convicted of murder and sexual assault in 1982, and ultimately sentenced to life in prison after escaping the death penalty in his first trial. Keith, welcome.
Hello.
All right. And Gloria Williams, niece of Levon Brooks, who was in the series, but sadly passed away of cancer in 2018, just 10 years after he regained his freedom. Thank you for joining us, Gloria.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you?
Fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. From the Innocence Project, my supervising attorney, Vanessa Potkin, Director of Post-Conviction Litigation and attorney for Levon Brooks and Kennedy Brewer. And we also have Dana Delger, attorney in strategic litigation, and for Keith Harward. So great to have you both here.
Hi.
Thank you, Eddie. It's great to be reunited 15 years later.
Yeah, I think the last thing we did at the Innocence Project was karaoke fundraising.
The early days. We might be back to it with what's going on in the world.
Making t-shirts and doing karaoke to save people. We also want to mention that Kennedy Brewer could not join us today as he is recovering at home with his family after enduring a stroke last month. So prayers up for Kennedy. And
Yes.
Vanessa has a few things to say about that.
Yes.
That's right. There's a Mighty Cause fundraiser that we're doing to help support Kennedy as he recovers and in this time period where he can't work. And I'll be sharing that link throughout the program so that hopefully, the community is really rallying behind him. And, and so we, hope people will galvanize, especially after they hear more about what Kennedy and Gloria and Levon and, our clients and their families have been through.
Yeah. And, I just want to piggyback on that. Like, you see the awards that exonerees are granted when they're given, when they get their freedom back, but it's never enough. It's never enough. And anything that we can do to help the exonerees, they need it. So thank you to everyone. Thank you for tuning in. And for everyone on Facebook, feel free to leave questions in the Facebook comments. They'll get dropped in our chat. We'll do our best to get to them. And it's only been a week since the Innocence files came out. And with COVID-19 keeping most of you at home, you guys do have time to watch. So we hope you do. But for those that have any favorite moments, and Keith, Gloria, like what were your guys' favorite moments to see on the screen?
Keith, are you first or me first?
You're ladies first. Go ahead. You're fabulous. Anyway.
Okay. My favorite moment was like, I could just go back and say when I like when Kenny, I'm gonna just say when he first, wrote the letter, right to the Innocent Project. Because if it wasn't for Kenny writing the letter to the Innocent Project, he or Levon would have never got out. You know what I'm saying? And I think that, that was my favorite moment. And another favorite moment was when they got Forrest Allgood out of office. When Cologne beat him. That was a good moment for me too. Mm-hmm. A good moment. Now I'm gonna let you go, Keith.
Okay. Selfishness being the number one thing I should be, but I didn't have a chance to be selfish for so long because I wasn't able to be anyone. It's seeing my beautiful Tater Blue, my beautiful bus. It all starts back in the day when I already gave up. I was going to die in prison. I was never going to get out. I always had this dream of traveling across country, that type of thing. Well, I have the opportunity to do it now because the great people, the taxpayers of Virginia and that type of thing were able to give me a compensation and stuff to be able to get me a motorhome and be able to do that travel thing. The best moment probably would have been if my parents had been there when I would have got out. That would have been it. But every day is just fabulous. I mean, people just don't realize what they're missing because they won't stop long enough to see. And I'm able to, because I've had a third of a century in training of being in my head the whole time, that I see and hear things that most people don't see. And it just to be out and be able to share with people and stop and say, hold on a second, pay attention to what's going around, see what's happening with your family. And because it can go just like in a split second and you don't have anything to do with it. It could just disappear that quick. Yeah. So that's kind of, the question's kind of wrong. That would have been the greatest moment, but to be able just to be out, just to be able to be out and to be able to experience stuff, because I felt worthless because I couldn't do anything. I couldn't help people. I couldn't be with anyone, and just to be out and every day, and that's why I tell people I'm the luckiest person in a 3-foot circle, because I realize this every moment.
Right.
Dane, what about you being, the attorney for Keith and stuff? What was your favorite moment of the episode?
Oh, like Gloria, I really love hearing the letters. When we, it never fails to make me cry to hear that letter being read. And when Peter is reading it and you just hear Keith's voice, this person that we know and love, this incredible person reaching out, waiting, hoping that someone will hear him. It sends chills down your spine to then know that it was true, that everything he said in the letter was true, that he was innocent and that he was waiting and that we were then able to help him. It's, it chokes you up to think about, especially when you see Keith today you know, there's nobody on earth enjoying their freedom and life more than Keith.
Yeah, it's great to see it. Gloria, were you going to say something before then?
And I just always think Vanessa and Peter now. I just, you know, they always going to be in my heart for that. You know, because when I first met Vanessa down to Macon jail when Levon had came back down there, you know, and I was, you know, I was like, what's going on with that? You know, it was so, and they're just in my heart right now. But you know, and you know, I'm gonna just wait till it get on down to the point where we get on down to the questions, because you know, I'm gonna
No,
just
you go ahead and talk, Gloria. You could go ahead and talk like the, you know, we don't gotta like go in order or anything. You talk about what you want to talk about.
Because I'm, you know, I'm gonna just keep it to the point. Yeah, I'm gonna just go ahead and say, because you know, like I said, Vanessa and Peter, I'm gonna, you know, I don't even know how to explain, but
yeah, you do. You're doing a good job. Go ahead.
like I'm gonna just say, they gonna be in my heart for everything they done for him, and he was like to the point that he didn't have no grudge against people, and I was like, to me, it stayed in my heart for a long time for me to just let it go. Because 18 years, they kept him behind bars for nothing. And it just took me a long time to let it go. And every time I talk about it right now, it still hurts. And I'm trying to be strong. But that was his life. And then after that, you're going to get out. And then here come cancer. And he just still tried to be strong with it. But it just hurt me so bad. And he just wanted to go back to his life or what he was doing. And it just, he just wanted to just do what he wanted to do. But to me, I don't know. That was just him.
Vanessa, was there a favorite moment for you?
I think, I don't know if it's a moment per se or the approach. I mean, I think really putting Levon and Kennedy's story and Parchman Prison in historical context, right? Because this isn't, you know, what happened to them isn't something that just, you know, popped up in 1990, you know, when these abductions and horrible murders of children happened in Noxubee County. You know, it really, sometimes when we talk about wrongful convictions, you know, we start the story and we just kind of talk about the crime and what happened. But, you know, when you look at their stories, this is, you know, this is 13th personified, right, in stories. It goes back to the, you know, history of, you know, slavery and the convict lease system and what the history of Parchment was, and even, you know, where the plantation Levon was born on. And so, you know, there's a history here, and it's important that people really understand that when they hear people's stories, because we're not disconnected from the past. This is, you know, the past still manifesting itself. And so I think they did a really good job of, you know, putting the case in its historical context and really exposing the people in the story, you know, who participated in this, like, you know, Michael West, you know, for who they are and what they really stand for.
I agree. The thing that I found the most interesting was that in many ways, the show within the show was this character study of Dr. West, because, you know, when we run into people that, you know, aren't very aware of the Innocence Project, or they read one of these cases in the newspaper, they think it's an anomaly. But then they're like, how does this happen? How does our justice system not serve justice? And you realize that it only takes one person with an ego or with just an ill heart who is so determined to prop up himself, his career, his standing in society, to prevent justice from being served and from protecting us, because that killer was out there for you. He committed the second crime. And so I was very upset. I threw my remote. I had to come back and calm down and turn the TV back on. But I got into the character study of Dr. West because I was like, this is all it is. It was this guy's pride. He didn't want to admit that he was perpetuating fake science. And then to watch it during Corona was insane, because every day we're hearing fake science and fake guidance from the White House. And it just takes one person's insane ego to do this much damage to people's lives.
But if I may interject,
Sure.
they're
Yeah.
all like that. Every time I speak, it's about ego and per diem is what it is, because they can go out to the Sheraton and get a diploma over the weekend to do this, and then they go around the country, around the world, traveling, getting nice hotel rooms, and get to go up in the courtroom and say, I am Lord. You believe everything I say, because that's what happened in my thing. And I relate it to the Wizard of Oz, when we're pulling the curtain back now. We're pulling the curtain back, and there's a man back there pulling control. Before, it was all smoke and mirrors, and that's what happened to me. Once this Dr. Levine character got up there and started just spouting his credentials, that's all he had to do. And I was convicted. The jury was so impressed by his credentials and the names that were spoken, they didn't have to do any more trial. They could say, okay, y'all think he's guilty? They're going to say, hell yeah, this guy that the judge let in says it's so it's got to be so. Therefore, he's guilty. And it's all about ego, and just like Eddie said, it's all about that ego thing. I say it's true, so it's going to be true. And then years later, to find out, oh, it's a bunch of crap. Then they say, well, and in my case, they want to make excuse when other people were involved, all this kind of stuff. They don't want to fess up and say, oh, I made a mistake, because they're not human beings. They don't have soul. They don't feel. And I told in New Orleans when I was down there, in front of those odontologists down there with Chris Fabricant. I told him, I said, you people ought to go back, and every trial you testified in, you ought to contact those jurisdictions and say, I made a mistake. I'm here to correct it, because I'm a human being and I have a soul, and I want to make things right. And that will help also possibly in the future to having people locked up that actually did the crime, because the guy that did the crimes I was convicted for continued to commit crimes. He died in Ohio behind kidnapping and abduction charges. So he kept doing what he was doing, because he got away with murder the first time that I was blamed for. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that was another interesting thing in the show, is to see the different bite mark doctors. You had Dr. West, and then you had the Ted Bundy doctor, who also was not a good doctor, but would acknowledge in some ways, like, shit, I'm fucking up. This practice might not be all it's propped up to be. He would never let the Ted Bundy one go. He was always like, because that's the case that made him. But you could see in his mind him accepting that he was also a funny doctor. And then you see the DAs, the difference between the district attorneys, and the district attorneys that when they know they've made a mistake are like, I'm going to correct this. And the other DAs that are like, let me try to cover this up. And so in your guys' experience, especially the attorneys, like, how frustrating is that for you guys when you've caught them red-handed and you have the evidence and you still can't get them to come off their high horse?
As far as all good, he just looked like it just killed him to apologize to him. You see how he just sit there and like you could have just tore his heart out. Like, I didn't want to apologize to these guys. I just lost this case.
I think that, Dana can speak to, some of the specifics around, the dentist and that work, but just in terms of, DAs in general and this resistance, it just is, the actors in the system so often just don't view people who are coming in as human beings. It's nothing to them. They're going home every night, but our clients are in prison, and we see what's going on at Parchment today, in all of the deaths that are happening, the horrific conditions, the fact that it's just like it's a worse nightmare, and people are there for things they didn't do. People are there for small things that shouldn't even be criminalized. It's just, it's a horrific system that we're in, and just the humanity is lost, so it's, I love you, Gloria, and I do remember that moment when we first met at the jail, and just this. It's nothing for the DAs to oppose. We're waiting right now in Louisiana for somebody named Daryl Henry to walk out of prison, He's been in for 16 years. He's going to get bail today. The court ordered him bail 2 months ago, but the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office fought that grant of bail for 2 months, you know, and it's nothing for them because they just don't view other people with any humanity. You know, this is just an intolerable system.
Yeah. Dana, do you have something to say? Oh, is Dana muted?
Still muted, sorry. I
Oh,
was just saying, I
okay.
think Vanessa has it exactly right about the system generally. And as to what Keith was saying, again, exactly right. We live in a world where our forensic dentists, you know, the science is 100% clear. The wisdom of the scientific community is 100% clear. The history of exonerations with bite marks is 100% clear that we should never, ever be using this evidence. And we still not only have district attorneys who want to keep innocent people in prison, who want to stand behind death penalty cases. Vanessa and I and our colleagues at Chris Fabricant at the IP and Tucker Carrington at the Mississippi Innocence Project have a death row client right now who is facing execution because of Michael West's testimony, standing behind it. And we have, you know, current cases where someone hasn't yet been convicted, and prosecutors still, and will, you know, in the face of all of this evidence, still seek to use bite mark evidence. And it's hard not to conclude that the system is deep, you know, the system, we can't say this is a just system or a fair system at all, if that's the world we live in, and it is.
That was the craziest thing for me to realize coming to work at the Innocence Project as just a clerk, was that I thought being a lawyer was about proving something or figuring out what the answer was. And then it's like, all right, we're all done. But at the Innocence Project, I felt like very little of the work was actually about proving it. Like all of the cases, because at the Innocence Project, for those that don't know, we would be assigned cases, and then every student over the years would log information and log evidence and log who they spoke to. And sometimes you would get a client and it'd be 3 years, 5 years, and they're like, yes, we know that like none of the evidence points to this guy. We've located the rape kit, or we've located the evidence that would potentially have DNA, and we cannot get the county clerk to go get it for us. And I remember realizing at one point, I was like, this job isn't about the law or statutes. It's about hustling and figuring out whatever way to get that clerk to pick up that box and get it tested. And I think because I was a shitty lawyer, I think that's what I ended up.
No, I have to say something, Eddie, is that is exactly why when I interviewed you, and I remember interviewing for the clinic, I was like, he is going to be good at this because you were a hustler, you were a make it person. And I was like, he's going to get in there. And it's not about legal arguments. Sometimes it's about who's going to be more perseverant, who's creative, who's going to be a make it happen person. And that's why when I met you, I was like, oh, this guy has to be in the clinic, because that's exactly, you know, who gets things done in the criminal justice system.
It ended up like my job was just like being Miss Cleo, like talking to people about their relationships. Like, hey, you mind grabbing that rape kit?
We get very personal. We talk about things, you know.
Yeah. And we got testing for 2 clients, you know, we ended up getting testing. So we have a question from the audience, Shannon Stager. She says, I would love to know if any prosecutors or law enforcement officials have ever been held accountable for their actions.
Very rarely. You know, prosecutors right now have immunity for almost anything that they do in the courtroom. So it's very hard to hold prosecutors accountable. And that's something that the Innocence Project and other organizations right now are working to change. We have to eradicate those laws. And, you know, professional associations very rarely hold people accountable. I don't think it's any different for, you know, experts who give faulty testimony, Dana, but, you know, what do you think?
Oh yeah, almost no, there's almost no sort of accountability for forensic experts, even forensic experts like bite mark experts who are giving patently false testimony. I do want to just say one other thing, though, in the context of our work at the project, the broader work, that, we have all of this, we were talking about prosecutorial misconduct, prosecutors who do deeply wrong things and they are not held accountable. But we also just have this sort of ordinary operation of the system where right now many courts permit junk science to be introduced. You have a prosecutor who might be doing nothing wrong, who isn't like committing of, hiding evidence or doing these things that seem really obviously wrong, but are still promoting promoting miscarriages of justice, still putting on this evidence just because courts let it in. So, the system has these extreme examples of unfairness, but also just the ordinary grind of the wheels is deeply unfair.
Yeah. And so thank you, Dana. It leads right into the next question. It's interesting. Reese Gordon is asking, how do you manage clients' expectations in reviewing their case?
It's really hard because many people who write into the Innocence Project, we have thousands of people who have written into us whose cases are being evaluated. And so it could take somebody from the time they first write a letter, years, sometimes 5 or 10 years before we're even in the position to take on their case. And then on average, once we open someone's case, it can take 7 years to obtain an exoneration. Right. So it is a lot, it is just a really long process. And, I think that we just have to be honest with people, right? At the end of the day, when you're in prison and you're stripped of everything, one thing you do have is your word. And, it's really important to be upfront and to, be realistic with expectations of, what we can do. And thankfully, there are more organizations who are taking on, cases post-conviction. And so there are more avenues for people. But it's really difficult and it's horrible to have to, deliver, disappointing news because the DA wants to be vindictive and file an appeal or, file this opposition, to have to, keep telling a client and their family, okay, it's going to be, months down the road.
Dana, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it's the same for us, that, being honest with our clients about how, our clients know the system is unfair, right? That's why they're in this position in the first place. And so being honest with them about the fact that that unfairness doesn't go away once we start looking at a case, that, the forces that put them in prison to begin with are still at play, and it's going to take a long time, and success isn't guaranteed. We don't always win. We lose a lot.
Keith and Gloria, what was it like for you guys on the receiving end, knowing that your case was in the system at the Innocence Project, but what was the waiting game like, and what were the expectations?
Well, for me, I really didn't know at the time that, it was for Kenny to write in. Kenny wrote in to the case, to the Innocent Project. And that's, when I was looking at it, and I didn't know how long it took for Kenny to write in to them. And when I found out that he had did it, and as I was looking at it on the tape, as it looked like it took a process of it. And then when they did Kenny, and like I said, Levon evidence had looked like mainly disappeared at the time, like the sperm sample and everything. And then, but it still was enough to, to come about for him to get out. If it wasn't for that, he probably would have still been in there until he died. But I like I said, I just thank them. Thank for all that they did to just dig up everything to help him out of there.
So Eddie, one of the, perversities of the system is that if you're convicted of capital murder, you're going to get lawyers post-conviction. But if you're convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment, after your direct appeal, you're not entitled to have any lawyer appointed for you. So Kennedy Brewer was convicted and sentenced to death. So he kept getting assigned post-conviction counsel to work on his case. And Levon said, because of all the alibis who said, he was at the nightclub working the night that the crime happened, he was, they had doubt about his innocence or guilt, still convicted him, but sentenced him to life. So then after his direct appeal, he's not entitled to any lawyer. So he's stuck in Parchment without resources, and at some point, Levon said he just resigned himself to that. This is, he didn't have an avenue to advocates or to challenge his conviction. He didn't have the evidence, as Gloria was saying. And so he just was like, this is what it's going to be. And when we started working on Kennedy's case, we were doing a reinvestigation, and then somebody, told us about Lavon's case. They said, well, there was this other little girl who went missing. And, Peter and I, like, our heads were spinning. We thought, wait a second, were these crimes investigated as being committed by the same person? They're identical. 2 little girls taken in the middle of the night. All of the facts are the same in this small town, close in time, a couple miles away. This is crazy. And, some people would say, well, we knew Lavon couldn't have committed the second crime because he was in prison at that time. But it was like, and when we talked to the lead investigator on the case, we asked him, did you investigate these cases as being committed by the same person? And he was like, no. And it's like, what is going on here? So it was, it's just sort of been obvious to anybody, that basically you had, the same person committing these crimes. But, instead there was just like a total indifference, to the truth.
Yeah, I mean, that was the crazy part watching the show. Like, just your common sense, the reasonable man or woman would have done those things, and they didn't do any of them. And in all these cases at the Innocence Project, you read and you're just like, at some point, it's not just a lack of common sense. Like, there was an intention to obstruct justice. That's the most exciting part. And we have another question from the audience. Abe Squared. Have wrongful convictions lessened since DNA testing is more common?
So the answer on that is no. And that is because, DNA is available in only a very small amount of cases. Less than, 10% of violent crimes, it's estimated, contain any DNA that can, get to the truth of the matter. And, prosecutors and investigators still lock in on some of these less reliable types of evidence. We're representing somebody now who was convicted of a crime that happened because one of an incentivized witness, basically somebody who was trying to cut a deal, implicated him and a couple other kids. And in this case, there ended up being DNA from the sexual assault kit of a very elderly woman that excluded all of the kids, but they were nonetheless convicted based on the confession. So, even in the case of very highly probative DNA today, where there's tunnel vision, where there's kind of malice intent, prosecutions continue. So it's I think that the value of DNA is that it's shining the light on the things that are wrong in the criminal justice system. It's showing us some of the problems, but it's not going to be the solution.
Slick move with the window there, Keith.
Well, see, I'm sitting at the beach. The beach is right here. The fishing pier
What?
is
I
right
didn't
there.
see
And I
that.
want
What
everybody to see.
happened? What happened?
Well,
And he creeped like this. He was like,
Well, because of the light and everything, there's a fishing pier right there. I'm at Holden Beach, North Carolina.
That's
in my beautiful motorhome.
beautiful.
yeah.
And the beach is there. Over the dune, there's water, salt water. So I wanted people to have that in the background, but the lights and stuff didn't work.
Yeah. But he did it like when I snuck back into my parents' house, like. And Keith, by the way, as you were doing it, Judith Jackson says, "Hi, Mr. Harward. Hope you are doing well."
I am doing fabulously. I mean, why wouldn't I? I'm free. Well, I'm not free. I'm unincarcerated. I have to explain that to people, and I want them to understand that it's great. Freedom and all that is great, but the underlying thing for me is that I will never be free of this. I will be unprisoned. I'll be unincarcerated or not there. But it's here. You see, things happen all the time, even to this day, that I revert back to my life. I spent more years in prison than I did in the street. I think I have 2 more years before I break even. I went in when I was 26. I got out when I was 60. You can do the math. So I still have a few more years before I'm equal as far as being in the free world or being in prison. So my upbringing was in prison. My family is in prison because of the fact that I grew up with these people. Some are good, some are bad. but I will never be free of it. I will be able to share and do things, but just like anybody, anything you do, when you get to be 60 years old, that's what you are. If you're a retired engineer, you're going to face everything as a retired engineer. If you're a waitress, you're going to be dealing with your life as a waitress. I'm a convict. I mean, I didn't do the crime, I did the time, but I am a convict. I grew up in prison. I am a convict. And anybody that's exonerated, I think, and I'm saying from my personal beliefs, that they will also be a convict to the day. And if they don't, then maybe they've missed something. You can take bad things and turn them positive. So I try to do that as much as I can. So I can use what happened to me and put it into a positive aspect, but I still will be a convict, and I will still be somebody that was punished for something I didn't do kind of severely. So it will always be there. Freedom is great, but it's not total. It's part of who I
Hmm.
Donna Venable has a question. She says, how do you get prosecutors on board to look into wrongful convictions?
Well, I mean, more and more prosecutors' offices are, creating conviction integrity units. And, when we open a case and we want to get DNA testing or we want to do a reinvestigation, we always reach out to the prosecutor's office. And, sometimes they agree and sometimes they just dig in. People often ask, what is the single thing that you could implement that would really reform the system? And I do think that it's hard to just pick one, but definitely changing the perspective of the prosecutors. Our Supreme Court says that a prosecutor's job is to do justice, not to just try to uphold or defend a conviction or, obtain a conviction. But unfortunately, I think that gets confused in a system that's adversarial and competitive. And, people view it as careers, and prisons are, profits, rather than really what it's supposed to be about, which is justice.
Dana, did you have any? Oh, Keith, go ahead. Go ahead, Keith.
Well, it to me is simple. A prosecutor, to be a prosecutor, has to prosecute. That's it. If you're going to be a baker, you got to bake. So a prosecutor, to be a prosecutor, he has to prosecute people. And sometimes, things are done that are illegal or mistaken or whatever the case may be. But once again, if you're going to be a prosecutor, you have to prosecute. You're either elected on the prosecutions or you're hired by your prosecution, not by the fact, oh, well, we figured out this person didn't do it, so we're going to let him go, or this person didn't do it. It's okay. Let's see who we can put up in that lineup right away and convict them so we can move on to the next thing. So the news people, which comes down to the media, they can move on to the next sensational type story. And I can make a name for myself.
I know that's why it happens, or perhaps it's why it happens, but I don't think that makes it okay. And I know you would agree with this, Keith. It's like, I think you expect more of our
exactly. I'm just saying, though, if you I just had a gentleman talk to me the other day. His son is going to Carolina. He saw the Innocence files, and he told his father, said, hey, I want to become a prosecutor and go out there and stop this from happening. And he says, son, it's an uphill battle, because if you get in there, you're going to have to do things that you don't want to do possible. So maybe you would like to go into the idea of maybe becoming someone like Dana Deldridge or Chris Fabricant, or someone that deals with innocence. I've been to these people's houses and stuff. They're not driving Ferraris and they're not living in mansions. They're there because of their hearts. And like Dana said earlier, what's the best thing you can do in the world is save someone's life. And that's what Dana and everyone, my heroes, once again, at the Innocence Project did. They gave me life. So therefore, I'm here. So thank you once again. And to the people out there that are paying attention and listening, and this bothers you, help out in some way. Donate.
Right.
Call your college and say, hey, I'd like to volunteer in your law class and help your law students. You know, I'll run out to the courtrooms or whatever I need, whatever can be done, and help these people, because the state don't step in, the federal government doesn't step in, the local municipalities do not step in and say, okay, well, we're going to give you money to test this stuff. We're going to give you the money to fly around the country and find these people. You see, it don't come free, and people don't understand when a wrongful conviction is discovered, the state don't jump in and say, what can I do to make this right? They're going to say, what can I do to slow this down until I get out of office to where people won't be pointing fingers at me, Mr. Prosecutor.
So can I just add one thing to what Keith just said, is that, you know, I think that when people think like, I'm going to be a prosecutor, right? They think that they're going into the system, they're going to be, you know, prosecuting people who did like serious violent crimes. And, you know, and the truth of the matter is that our system is clogged with petty cases. You know, we are a conviction mill. It's not trials. It's not what you're seeing on television as the criminal justice system. You know, if you spend any day in criminal court, you're watching people, you know, brought in who are in custody for driving without a license, you know, really, you know, relatively, you know, a range of crimes, or, you know, crimes, but like, you know, some very petty. And then just, you know, people who haven't met their public defenders, they're talking for 5 minutes, a plea is being taken because they're offered something to time served. I mean, the reality of our system versus what, you know, a bright-eyed person might think when they're thinking of going into the system, it's just, you know, it's totally different.
And not just people, Vanessa, but poor Black and brown people. That's who makes up the majority of people who get implicated in the criminal justice system,
Right.
especially
Right.
the lower level offenses that you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, do you want to talk more about that, Dana?
Sure. I mean, we have, you know, as Vanessa was saying earlier, we have an incredibly unjust system, and you can't look at, there's not a single statistic in criminal justice that you can look at in terms of who's being prosecuted and for what that doesn't show, I think, incredible disparities between white people and people of color, especially Black people, African Americans.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a problem there. And we know, and we also know that white people commit, for example, drug crimes at the same or higher rates than Black people. But that's not who gets prosecuted for drug crimes. We also know, you know, the Innocence Project has started to do more and more work on this, that, you know, many innocent people get arrested for misdemeanor crimes and plead guilty because going to court itself is a punishment. You know, in New York City, if you get arrested for a low-level crime, you might have to go, for a misdemeanor, you might have to go to court 4, 5, 10 times, even for your case to be dismissed, even if that's what ultimately happens. You know, imagine trying to get out of work 10 times so you can go to court, sit there for 2 hours, 3 hours, because, you know, New York City has one of the finest public defender systems in the country. Those lawyers are underfunded and overworked still, you know, even the best of the best. So it's a system that I think is really designed to do the kind of damage that it does. It's not an accident that this happens. It's on purpose.
And you know, working at the Innocence Project, one of the things was, I was like, man, this is just the tip of the iceberg. It's just that Barry and Peter and all of the attorneys at the Innocence Project and the exonerees did so well building a brand. And Innocence Project was one of the reasons why I decided not to be an attorney, because I was like, you know what? Like one of the biggest successes to me of the Innocence Project, and then say a documentary like The 13th, is that you guys have been able to communicate how this is systemic and it's not a case by case thing. This is an intentional systemic thing going on to put specific racial demographics behind bars, to take certain groups of society literally out of circulation. And it's like, if you even just look at like statutory sentencing, like I remember reading in class about the cocaine versus crack sentencing, and that's completely racist. More white people do powder, more Black people were smoking crack, and the sentencing is totally unjust. It made no sense. It was a cultural discrimination, racial thing. And you saw that throughout so many different types of cases. And I was there 06, 07. and then we were studying Bush v. Gore in constitutional law, and I was like, Bush v. Gore was just terrible law. Like even the justices on the Supreme Court were like, this is bad law. We just politically have to make a decision. And I remember Obama getting elected and running his campaign while we were all working for you, Vanessa, at that time. And there were kids in law school and around New York that were like, hey, it's a post-racial world. We have a black president. And I was like, dude, come read these cases. Come talk to what's happened to these people. And it's still going on. And that's why I also wanted to take a moment at the beginning of this, like Ahmaud Arbery, just, I mean, on every level, we're living in a really, really racist country that's just trying to eliminate groups.
Right.
And sometimes, as you said, you know, Eddie, you pointed out to something, sometimes it's very explicit. And then, you know, just I think a week or two ago, the Supreme Court struck down the use in a case called Ramos of non-unanimous juries, right? And this was a practice that, you know, was created explicitly, you know, to dilute the black vote. So we can still get, you know, convictions, even if there are two black people on the jury who are going to say, I don't find this officer's testimony credible, or I don't think the government proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt. And so it is so ingrained and built into so many aspects of the system.
To all you guys, do you see, I mean, Innocence Project is one solution to one very specific problem. And then you guys have done an incredible job branding it, communicating it, and trying to solve this problem. How else can we help? What, like, because people always listen to Innocence Project stories, and I think the first thing is, how do we help? How do we change? Are there like a top 3 things that any of you guys would recommend?
Okay.
I have one. I think that, you know, we talked about district attorneys, and Keith gave us the reality, right, of, you know, kind of the mentality. And it doesn't need to be that way. You pointed out that may be how it is, but it's not how it should be. And, you know, we shouldn't have incentives for just winning convictions. You should have an incentive to look, you know, you should be considered a good prosecutor. You should be promoted if you look at a case and you say, I don't think there's enough evidence here. I don't believe this evidence. I found it unreliable. I'm not going forward with the prosecution. You know, but right now we have so many incentives baked into the system based on obtaining, you know, convictions. And so we, you know, the public in this regard has a tremendous amount of power. Gloria talked about the fact that, you know, Forrest Allgood, who had, you know, had reigned as the prosecutor for decades in Knox City County, was voted out of office, you know, by a progressive prosecutor, Scott Cologne. And so, you know, the prosecutor elections are local. Most people don't pay attention to them, but sometimes they're decided with a matter of like hundreds or 1,000 votes make a difference. And prosecutors are very powerful. And so people have the ability to, you know, support local elections, to get involved and to support candidates. We're seeing it where prosecutors who are saying, we need to end mass incarceration. You know, we need to really be smart on crime. We need to take a different approach.
Anybody else have any other thoughts on it?
Look, Vanessa done said everything.
Yeah.
Look, she done took.
Well, first, if there's some type of way that, you know, a child does wrong, you punish them. Okay. I think in this case, if there's some way that punishment could be issued out to prosecutors back, because you know, it's old white man society for the most part. They're looking out for one another. They're not going to step out. They're going to pull the wagons in a circle. They're not going to give it up. One, in my case, one odontologist is not going to speak against another odontologist. In my case, there were 6 of them. In the end, all agreed because the head guy, this Levine character out of New York, says, well, he's the one that did it. So all of them lined up and said, yeah, he did it. Oh, yeah, he did. And yeah, he did. And then, you know, if we could hold them accountable would be one way to do it. If there was some way we could hold them accountable. And also, you know, people should go and sit in trials, go to the court. I found out there's groupies. There are people that go to trials every day to the courtroom, and they'll sit there and knit and stuff. They can't now because of 9/11. But in the day, they would sit there and just watch trials. They didn't care. They wanted to see what was going on. Be interested. Go to your local courthouses. Sit down, follow some trials. And the main thing is, if you see something on TV as far as a crime is committed, next thing you know, the police detectives are saying, well, this, and this, and then the prosecutor says something other, trial goes on, they're convicted. You think, okay, well, we're done. No, that's not the case. You should pay attention and not believe everything you see in the media, because once again, the media is here to promote themselves, because if they don't promote themselves, their sponsors are not going to advertise and they're not going to be in business. So, and that spreads across the thing. That goes with viruses and everything else that's involved. The media builds things up and puts them out of proportion. But if we could hold people accountable, that may slow some things down. I don't know. Some people, they don't care. I was in prison. They got cameras. They didn't care. They did whatever they wanted to do in front of cameras. So if we could hold them accountable, so.
Yeah, and to build on what you're saying, Keith, when I was looking at cases, I, in my head, started to think, how can we have a cultural solution to a legal problem? And when I started to see the way legislation was passed and statutes were being written, I was like, these are coming from the minds of people that belong to dominant culture, that usually belong to a wealthier class. And they're creating laws and rules in the idea that they're going to create a more efficient society, knowing and accepting, though, that a lot of these laws are going to make a ton of mistakes. And I was like, a lot of you rich people like baseball. Baseball is a sport where you keep track of errors and you're not supposed to make mistakes. And I was like, so you love this sport, but how is it that you will be willing to draw up these laws that are for sure not going to deliver justice every single time? And I think that a lot of lawyers and a lot of our representatives do not hold themselves to this standard of, we need to pass laws that will not make mistakes, because usually it's not people from their community that will be paying for those mistakes. They will have the money and resources to have proper representation. They know people in the community. They can pull strings. The majority of jurors are culturally similar to them, so they're not worried about it. And I think it's because they don't see every person in our society as a whole human like them. And so I started to think culturally about, how can we make every group in this country and in this world a whole person? How can we think about it and not make legislation at an arm's length distance? We should be thinking about these mistakes as our own friends and family.
Yes, and the whole deal, and the whole about this program, the Innocence Project, and everything, is to shine a light on stuff, and it's not just bite mark evidence, which I was convicted of, hair analysis. There's a number of things that they relied on in the past to get prosecution. Whether it was right or wrong, I can use this. I can pull this out to get a prosecution. So let me pull this card out, and we'll play this card to the jury of regular public people, and half of them don't even want to be there. So if somebody says, I think he's guilty, the rest of them, well, let's get home, let's vote, and guilty and go. It's still a good system, I think. It's once you put people in there, mistakes happen, and sometimes they're done intentionally. And where can I turn and say, okay, well, I had two odontologists testify at a trial to have me put to death. I was first convicted of capital murder, but I got a life sentence out of it. I didn't get the death penalty, but I got a life sentence. So these two characters premeditatedly wanted to put me to death behind what they thought or in their head was true, and their ego supported. Okay, yes, Mr. Harvard did it. I want him dead, and I'm going to testify to the fact that he did do it because I think he did it, but I'm telling y'all he did. Put him to death.
Well,
okay,
they weren't.
What if I'd have got the death penalty? I wouldn't be here.
They weren't looking at you as a human, Keith. They were like, he is part of our solution. We convict him, we close this case. Keith is a thing to use. And that is what I think the essential problem is. They're not looking at people as humans like them. And so last question, last comment It's
let
from
me let me let me
exonerating. Oh, sure. Go ahead, Gloria.
okay, let me stress something like Keith just said, like about the bite marks, like with Levon. Okay, like they had like 10, like several people, like the man that did it, they had took him into custody too. And they hadn't even took a bite mark of Levon. But when he went to court, like Dr. West, what he had did was took Levon like teeth marks at that time and started pressing them onto the girl. Okay, when you went to court, okay, this Levon did it then. Levon did it. You just want to throw somebody in jail at that time.
Yep.
Okay, like you said, you could just throw him in jail. A black man did it. Just put him behind bars. You didn't care. Y'all didn't even have the evidence then. Okay, this little girl, what her name was Ashley, the sister. She gonna say, you gonna let put the man named Uncle Bunky, whatever the man did. She gonna say she didn't even see Levon's face. Cause she said he had a clown, the mask on and all this stuff. Y'all didn't even care who did it. Y'all just stood by.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Ask a question.
No,
You can ask me a
using a
question.
5-year-old as an eyewitness was insane.
Right,
It all
right,
assert-
right, right. She did okay, she knew him as talking to her mom and then going with her mom, but okay, yeah, she got know Levon. That's all
Yeah.
you know. Okay, then what
The
she up
last
there? Yeah, she Levon, yeah.
the last
Really?
thing I'll say, Gloria, is a comment from another exoneree, Marty Tankliff. Marty, he wants us to acknowledge that prisoners are currently facing one of the country's deadliest issues, COVID-19, in prison, and prisoners should not die in prison. Especially Dana and Vanessa, any thoughts on that?
Well, we've made some motions right now to, try to help get some of our clients out who, have been proven innocent, have evidence of innocence based on COVID-19 and, some of whom have underlying conditions and, could die before the opportunity to be fully vindicated. And, the response we've been getting from government officials is, oh, this is overblown, right? And we know that, prisons are just, breeding grounds of disease and there's no ability to practice social distancing or, exercise hygiene. I do think that one good thing that is coming out potentially of the pandemic is it is making us think about, what's going on and our, over criminalization and the volume that's going through our system. And if we can let groups of people out now because of this crisis, then maybe it's time to take a step back and say, what are we doing? Why are we locking people up anyways in the first place?
Right.
I just have one last parting thought because I think I'm not going to get the mic again, which is I do think, part of the solution is, you also, getting people invested in reform and whether it's, somebody like Eddie from our days, together, Lauren Caseberg, who was in the Innocence Project with you and now runs the Illinois Innocence Project and, is doing this work directly. Or you, who carries the message with you and is fighting, for justice, whether it's you're traveling in a different country and, tasting a cuisine, but, whatever you're doing, but you carry it with you and you're, you're embodying this and living it. And so if more people are doing it, whether it's directly or indirectly, getting people to realize what's going on and be a part of the solution is what we need.
Thanks, Vanessa. That's dope. And they're telling me we are out of time. This was a lot of fun. It was
Man.
with you guys.
You gotta give other people more comments. I hogged the mic. Come on, everyone needs the last word.
Go. Okay, last words. We'll go around. Dana, how about last words? Fantastic. Dana, you want last word? We'll go around. Dana, then Gloria.
Very high pressure. Just to echo everything everyone has said, I hope people really take some lessons from the documentary, from Keith's case, from Kennedy and Levon's case about the need for, even more so than ever now, the need for valid and reliable science to guide important decisions that we make in our lives. And just to say briefly, Vanessa and her team and Innocence Network lawyers across the country are doing really extraordinary work to help free their clients under extreme circumstances. But it's important, and one thing I hope that we carry out of this is a deeper care for the conditions that we keep people in prison in, because even if you don't care about people in prison, or all of them, and you should, they're human beings, we know there are innocent men and women in prison, and Keith was speaking about this earlier. The conditions that are in prison, those are the conditions that innocent men and women, as well as people who might have committed crimes, suffer under. You know, we hopefully the suffering that, if there's any value to the suffering that prisoners are facing right now with COVID-19 has value. If there's any value, hopefully it's that we can care more deeply about how those people are treated. Because those people include people like Keith and Kennedy and Lavon, who have suffered greatly from their time in prison in ways that they didn't have to.
Keith, do you want to have a last word?
Yeah, people should pay attention, and I know it's hard to do in these days and times. I'd like to see the commission start, the National Commission start back up. That was in D.C. I was the very first and the very last exoneree to ever attend this commission in Washington, D.C. Through the DOJ. When our president got elected, he shut it down because he wanted the prosecutors to run things and not let the people in the commission run things. And this commission, what it was doctors, lawyers, judges, attorneys, people in the scientific world and stuff, and they would get together and say, okay, we need to set up some guidelines. You know, we can't just say, okay, because a guy put tires on a person's car, he's an expert on tires, like odontologists are on teeth, which are not in this case. And get this commission started back again, and give it some teeth to where the federal system could say, okay, well, our commission recommends that we look into this, or we exact these features out to be able to use this evidence, like for instance, scientific reliability behind bite mark evidence means no bite mark evidence because it's unreliable. And as you saw in the Innocence file, the past president says, well, we sent this thing out and nobody could agree on if it was a bite mark or not. In a lot of cases, they're not bite marks. It's scars or whatever. But I like to see that commission come back, because great minds come together like that, creating a dialogue and saying, okay, here's the problem. We've convicted and put people behind bars and even murdered them through the death penalty behind this type of forensic science. Well, 10 years later, we found out it's not any good. So we need to go back and do something about that first. But let's set up guidelines and say, okay, it has to meet this, and this, like fingerprints or DNA, things like that. More reliable science where people just can't get together and say, let's start something new. Let's start up a new expert in something. And I saw on the TV the other day, they've got experts now that can testify to headlight beams at night to match them to cars. I'm thinking, okay, I graduated high school. I'm a simple person. I don't know a lot of stuff, but that's all crap. You know, it's so simple. But if you put smoke and mirrors behind it, it throws it out of proportion, and people's mouth drops and slobber runs out and they're overwhelmed, as in my case, because I'm telling the truth. That's what happened to me. We need to get a commission or something together where they can go to the federal government and say, okay, each state can't do this. One state can, one state can't. Well, what's fair about that? You know, if I step across the state line, why am I guilty here of something and I'm not there? You know, as far as evidence is concerned, evidence is evidence. So if we could start something up like that again, have that commission put back together and have all these brilliant people from all aspects of the justice system get in and say, and let them battle it out so people don't have to go to prison. I know it costs money, President Trump, but it's only fair. And this is something you should do. It's only right. And that's what I feel. I think when I tell people about that commission and what it was supposed to do and then how it got shut down, people say, why? I said, well, you know, our president wanted to do that. And that's what I think it was. Checks and balances. That's it. You know, let's get some checks and balances and don't let people run wild with whatever they want to, and make sure that evidence is actually evidence. It's not opinion.
Thank you, Keith and Gloria. Last word. You have the floor.
I would just like to say I enjoyed you guys, and I would just like to say I would like people to just take time and just look at the innocent file and look and see that the bite marks evidence on people. Just take time to see and all the other DNA. Just take people's lives more into their hands personally. Just don't just say, oh, this person did it and that person did it. Look into that person's life more carefully before you convict the person and send them to prison. Don't just say, okay, this person is the main suspect. You're going to have more than one person. Make sure you look into that person's life, but just don't send that person down the road. That person and this person, you see how they did this person, and that person might did it. Take time and look into the person's life. Don't just give this person all that time like they did Keith, LaVon, and Kennedy. Don't do that to a person. Take time and look into that person's life before you send them to prison.
I agree. I think at the end of the day, if there's one thing to learn from the Innocence files, it's not to judge people. If you have an instinct to judge, try to empathize. Anytime that feeling rises up in you to judge, and it rises up in all of us, just push yourself to empathize. Push yourself to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, because that will lead you to the truth. And so I just want to say thank you to Gloria, Keith, Vanessa, and Dana for joining us all, and to all of you guys for watching. Please watch all 9 episodes of the Innocence Files. It's going to be the best stuff you've seen this year. And for those of you who want more live shows, join the Innocence Project today at 3 p.m. Eastern to discuss Thomas Hainsworth's case, also from the series, and The Innocent in Virginia. Lastly, the Innocence Project is a finalist for the Webby Award for Best Activism Website, and they need your vote. Today is the last day to vote. We'll drop all of the info in the comments. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Guys, and Vanessa, so good to see you.
So good to see you.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Keith. Bye, Vanessa.